At my mother's funeral, my uncle stood up and announced that I was adopted. The room froze. My hands tightened around the folded program in my lap, crumpling the edges as whispers rippled through the church. He didn't even wait until after the service, until after we'd buried her. He dropped it like a bomb, his voice carrying across the pews like he'd just revealed the weather forecast. "You all deserve to know," he said, his eyes locked on me, smug and certain. "She wasn't her real daughter. My sister adopted her." I felt heat rise in my face as every head turned toward me. My chest hollowed out, my throat constricted, and all I could think was, why now? Why here? And what he didn't expect was that I already had the DNA results. Before I pull you into the rest of this story, I want you to pause for a second. This is a wild one, full of betrayal, lies, and revenge. I'd love to know, where are you watching this from? Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far my story travels. Now let me take you back. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia. My mother raised me alone after my father died when I was still a baby. At least, that was the story I had always believed. She was my anchor, my best friend, my entire world. We weren't rich, but she sacrificed everything to give me a life filled with love and dignity. My uncle, her younger brother, was always around, but never in the warm, protective way uncles usually are. He was slick, charming in public, but there was always a smirk in his eyes when he looked at me. Like he knew something I didn't. He owned a small business and liked to parade around like he was the successful one in the family. Whenever he visited, he'd bring gifts that felt more like insults. Cheap jewelry, a box of chocolates with half the pieces missing, and once, a fake designer handbag that broke within a week. Still, my mother always told me to respect him. "He's family," she'd whisper whenever I rolled my eyes. "But family isn't supposed to destroy you in public." The funeral was already unbearable. Watching them lower my mother into the ground felt like someone was burying my soul. I barely had the strength to stand, let alone face scandal. But when my uncle made his announcement, suddenly the grief was mixed with something darker. Suspicion. Adopted? Oh, that couldn't be true. My mother loved me too deeply, too fiercely for me to believe I wasn't her blood. But as much as I wanted to reject it, doubt slithered into my chest. And worse, the way my uncle looked at me, it wasn't pity. It was triumph. That night, I sat at my mother's old desk, the one that still smelled faintly of her lavender perfume. My hands trembled as I opened the drawer and pulled out the white envelope I'd been hiding for weeks. The DNA results. I had ordered the test a month before her death, after finding an old photo in one of her albums. A newborn picture with her handwriting on the back. "Baby girl, July 14, 1996. The problem? That wasn't my birthday. Mine was June 2, 1996. I thought it was a mistake at first until I noticed another oddity. The baby in the photo had a tiny birthmark near her ear. I didn't. Something inside me whispered that I needed answers. So I secretly took a DNA test. Now, with my uncle's words still burning in my ears, I tore open the envelope again as if hoping the results had magically changed. But the truth stared back at me. 0% biological relation to my mother. I wasn't her daughter. For days I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. The grief of losing her was tangled with betrayal, confusion, and a rage I couldn't name. My mother had lied to me my entire life. My uncle had humiliated me in front of everyone. And I didn't even know who I was anymore. But I'm not the type to stay broken. If there was one thing my mother had taught me, it was that truth always comes to the surface no matter how deeply buried. So I decided to dig. The first clue came from her old jewelry box. Hidden under the velvet lining, I found a folded letter addressed to her. The handwriting was masculine, sharp, and hurried. "Thank you for raising her. One day when the time is right, she deserves to know the truth. But you and I both know the danger if my brother finds out. Protect her at all costs." It wasn't signed. But there was only one brother that letter could be referring to. My uncle. I started piecing it together like a crime board in my head. My mother wasn't my biological mom. Someone had trusted her to raise me. That someone was afraid of my uncle. And now, years later, my uncle had decided to expose me, right after my mother's death. But that's when I remembered something else. My mother's will. She had told me before she passed that everything she owned, our house, her savings, even her jewelry, was left to me. She wanted me secure, safe, and cared for. And my uncle? He wasn't in it. Suddenly it all clicked. If I wasn't her biological daughter, maybe he could contest the will. Maybe he could take everything from me. This wasn't about truth. It was about money. I hired a lawyer the next week. And that's when the games began. My uncle filed a petition to invalidate the will, claiming I had no legal right to the inheritance because I wasn't real family. I sat across from him in court, my hands clenched under the table as he smirked like he had already won. He even brought fake witnesses to claim my mother had confided in them about the adoption. But I had something he didn't know. The DNA results. And that letter. Still, something told me this battle wasn't just about the house or the money. It was deeper. Personal. He wanted to destroy me. And when I started looking deeper into his past, I found something that turned the entire story upside down. The more I dug, the more I realized my uncle's exposure at the funeral wasn't some random outburst. It was calculated. A weapon. I started with public records. I'd never cared much about them before, but now I was desperate. Hours blurred into nights as I scrolled through databases, courthouse archives, and even old newspaper clippings from Richmond. That's when I found it. A case file from 1996. A custody dispute. Names redacted in some sections but clear enough in others. The case involved an infant girl, born June 2, 1996. My exact birthday. And listed as interested parties were my mother, my uncle, and someone else. A man whose last name I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I printed the record. Why was my uncle involved in a custody case the year I was born? I shoved the papers into a folder and drove straight to the only person left who might give me answers. My mother's best friend, Mrs. Reynolds. Mrs. Reynolds lived in a quiet suburb, the kind of place where neighbors waved from porches and mailboxes leaned with age. When she opened the door, her eyes widened at the sight of me. "Sweetheart," she whispered, pulling me into a hug that smelled like cinnamon cookies. "I'm so sorry about your mother." We sat at her kitchen table, sunlight slanting through lace curtains. I slid the custody file across the wood surface. "I need you to tell me the truth. Who am I?" Her face drained of color. She pushed the file back toward me like it burned her fingertips. "I promised your mother I'd never say a word." "Please," I begged, my voice breaking. "She's gone. He's trying to ruin me. And I don't even know who I am anymore." Her eyes filled with tears. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, then finally whispered, "Your mother wasn't lying when she said she loved you. She raised you like her own because she wanted to protect you." "Protect me from what?" Mrs. Reynolds hesitated, then leaned in close. "From your uncle. He wasn't trying to expose you. He was trying to erase you. Because you're not just adopted. You're his daughter." The words slammed into me like a truck. His daughter. I sat frozen, my breath shallow, my palms sweating. "No, that can't be true." Mrs. Reynolds shook her head. "It's the truth. Back then your uncle was wild, drugs, affairs, debts. He got a woman pregnant, but he refused to take responsibility. Your grandmother threatened to disown him, and the woman didn't want the baby caught in his chaos. That's when your mother stepped in. She took you in, raised you, and promised never to tell." I felt sick. My uncle wasn't just trying to rob me of my inheritance. He was trying to hide his own shame. And suddenly, the smug look he wore at the funeral made perfect sense. He thought he'd buried the only person who could keep the secret. He thought I'd crumble under his revelation. But he didn't know I had the DNA results. And now I had his motive. I left Mrs. Reynolds' house with fire in my veins. My uncle wasn't going to win. He had stolen my identity, humiliated me, and tried to strip me of everything my mother worked for. So I started planning my revenge. First, I ordered a second DNA test, this time comparing my sample to his. If Mrs. Reynolds was right, it would prove paternity. Second, I began gathering every shred of evidence I could find. The custody file. The letter in my mother's jewelry box. Financial documents showing my uncle's debts. Anything that painted the picture of who he really was. Third, I started watching him. I'd never been the type to spy, but grief and rage turned me into someone new. I followed him after court hearings, sat in my car with the windows down, and listened as he bragged to his friends at bars. He was reckless, always running his mouth. And one night I struck gold. It was a Friday evening and I parked across from a dingy bar downtown. Through the cracked window I could hear him laughing with two men. "She has no idea," he slurred. "Thinks she's going to keep that house. Once the judge sees she's not blood, it's mine. All mine." The men chuckled. One asked, "But aren't you worried she'll dig too deep? What if she finds out?" My uncle waved a dismissive hand. "She's too naive. Even if she did, who'd believe her? I've got half the family convinced she's some charity case already." I recorded every word on my phone, my pulse pounding with adrenaline. But the real shock came when he lowered his voice and added, "Besides, if she pushes too hard, I'll make her disappear just like her mother." My blood went cold. What did he mean by that? My mother had died of a stroke. At least that's what the doctor said. But now doubt clawed at my mind. Had he done something to her? That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed his words again and again. My mother had been healthy, vibrant, full of life. Until suddenly she wasn't. Could it be possible he had a hand in her death? If that was true, then I wasn't just fighting for my inheritance. I was fighting for justice. The next morning I drove to the coroner's office. I begged for her records, claiming I needed them for legal reasons. After hours of red tape, they finally handed me a file. The cause of death: cardiac arrest, possible complications. But tucked in the notes was something strange. Trace amounts of a chemical, digitalis, had been found in her system. It's a heart medication, but she'd never been prescribed it. My hands shook as I read. Someone had poisoned her. And suddenly my uncle's threat echoed in my skull. "I'll make her disappear just like her mother." I knew then what I had to do. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about survival. I went to the police with the recording. They listened, frowned, and said they'd look into it. But I saw the doubt in their eyes. Without hard evidence, they wouldn't move fast enough. So I doubled down on my own investigation. I hacked into his trash emails with the help of a friend who owed me a favor. And what we found was damning. Messages between him and a shady pharmacist. Requests for extra samples of digitalis. Payments made in cash. My stomach twisted. He had poisoned her. My mother. The only person who ever truly loved me. And he thought he'd get away with it. Not anymore. The day of the next court hearing, I walked in with a folder so thick it barely fit in my bag. My uncle swaggered to his seat, giving me that same smirk that had haunted me since the funeral. He thought today would be the day he took everything. But today would be the day I exposed him. The courtroom was packed. The air buzzed with whispers, the scrape of chairs, the rustle of papers. My uncle strutted in like he owned the place, his suit freshly pressed, his tie gleaming as if he'd dressed for a victory parade. He caught my eye across the aisle and smirked, that same self-satisfied curl of the lips that made my blood boil. I sat straighter, clutching the folder in my lap. My hands were trembling, but not with fear anymore, with purpose. The judge entered and everyone rose. My heart pounded as the bailiff called the case. Estate of Margaret Price versus contesting party, Samuel Price. My uncle rose like a performer on stage. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth, rehearsed, dripping with false grief. "I come before this court not to be cruel but to uphold the truth. The young woman sitting over there," he gestured toward me, pausing dramatically, "is not my sister's biological child. She has deceived this court by pretending to be rightful heir. But the evidence will show she was adopted and therefore the will is invalid. Gasps rippled through the spectators. He soaked it in like applause. The judge turned to my lawyer. And your response? My attorney nodded toward me. We will let Miss Price speak for herself. My throat tightened. This was it. The moment I either sank or surfaced. I stood, knees wobbling, folder clutched like a life raft. Your Honor's true. DNA tests confirm I was not biologically related to my mother. My uncle's smirk widened as though he'd already won. But I wasn't finished. I flipped open the folder, holding up the first page. But what my uncle left out is this. I took a breath, my voice steady now. I may not be her biological daughter, but I am his biological daughter. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, murmurs, shocked cries. My uncle's face drained of color, his mouth falling open like a trapdoor. The judge banged his gavel. Order in the court. Order. I laid the document on the evidence table. The second DNA test results. This test proves a 99.9% probability of paternity. My so-called uncle is my father. For the first time in my life I had silenced him. He slumped back in his seat, eyes wide, forehead damp with sweat. But I wasn't done. I pulled out the letter from my mother's jewelry box. And this is a letter written to my mother by an unidentified man, begging her to protect me from him, my father. Because even back then they knew the danger he posed. The judge frowned, studying the evidence. Mr. Price, do you have a response? My uncle stammered, his voice cracking. Lies. Forgeries. She's desperate, making up stories too. I cut him off, slamming the next piece of evidence onto the table. And this is a custody file from 1996, listing him as an involved party in my adoption. He knew the truth all along. The crowd's whispers grew louder, feeding off his unraveling composure. His perfect mask was slipping and the predator beneath was showing. But the coup de grace was yet to come. Your Honor, I said, forcing my voice to stay calm, this isn't just about inheritance. It's about murder. The courtroom went silent. I pulled out my phone, pressing play on the recording I'd captured at the bar. His voice filled the room, slurred but chilling. If she pushes too hard, I'll make her disappear just like her mother. Gasps. Shouts. A woman in the gallery covered her mouth in horror. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Mr. Price, care to explain this recording? My uncle shot to his feet, face flushed. She's twisting my words. That's not proof of anything. But I wasn't finished. I slid over the coroner's report. My mother's cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest. But toxicology found traces of digitalis, a drug she was never prescribed. And here, I slammed down the printouts of his shady emails, our emails between him and a pharmacist requesting extra samples of the same drug. Paid for in cash. The room exploded. People shouted, cameras flashed, the gavel pounded like thunder. My uncle lunged toward me, red-faced, spitting with rage. You little liar. You ruined me. You think you can destroy me? Two bailiffs wrestled him back, straining as he fought against them. His polished mask was gone now, replaced with pure, unfiltered fury. And for the first time, everyone saw him for what he really was. The judge ordered a recess. As the courtroom emptied in chaos, I sat trembling, tears streaming silently down my cheeks. I'd done it. I'd exposed him. But I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Because deep down I knew this wasn't over. He wasn't the type to go down quietly. And sure enough, as the bailiffs dragged him past me, he leaned close enough for only me to hear. His voice was low, venomous, deadly calm. You think you've won? This isn't finished. You'll regret ever crossing me. A chill shot through my spine. Because I knew he meant it. The days after the hearing were a blur. News spread quickly, headlines screaming about the funeral revelation, the DNA shock, the murder accusation. People I'd known my whole life looked at me differently, some with pity, some with awe, some with suspicion. But my uncle? He was released on bail while the investigation continued. And that's when the real terror began. At first it was small things. A shadow outside my window late at night. Anonymous calls that went silent when I answered. My car tires mysteriously slashed. Then it escalated. One evening I came home to find my mother's framed photo shattered on the floor, though I hadn't touched it. A note tucked inside the broken glass read, "Go back to the grave with her." My hands shook as I clutched the note. He was trying to scare me into silence. But all it did was fuel the fire burning inside me. If he wanted war, he was going to get it. I doubled my efforts. With my lawyer's help, I secured subpoenas for his financial records. What we uncovered was a trail of corruption. Embezzlement from his own business, debts to dangerous people, and hush money payments that stretched back years. Every thread I pulled unraveled another secret. And every secret gave me more ammunition. But the real turning point came when I found an old voicemail on my mother's landline machine. It was faint, scratchy, but clear enough. My uncle's voice, panicked, hissing, "If you tell her the truth, I swear you'll regret it. She'll never forgive you. Keep your mouth shut." The timestamp? 3 days before my mother's sudden stroke. That was the final nail in his coffin. I handed everything to the police. This time they couldn't ignore it. They reopened her case, launched a full investigation, and finally arrested him for homicide. But even in handcuffs, even in the back of a squad car, he twisted his head to glare at me. His eyes burned with hatred and his lips curved into a chilling smile. Like he still had one more move left. The trial became a circus. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps every morning. Cameras flashed in my face when I tried to walk inside, their voices pelting me with questions. How does it feel to discover your uncle is your father? Do you believe he killed your mother? Are you afraid he'll come after you next? Afraid? Yes. But more than that, I was furious. And fury gave me strength. Inside, the courtroom felt like a stage, every detail magnified, every breath dissected. My uncle, my father, sat at the defense table, his hands cuffed but his eyes sharp, calculating. He traded his smug smile for a mask of wounded innocence, a performance meant for the jury. And disturbingly, he was good at it. The prosecution laid out the evidence. The toxicology report, the digitalis purchases, the emails, the voicemail, and of course the recording where he threatened me. Each piece was like a puzzle clicking into place, painting him as the man who murdered his own sister to cover his sins. But his defense attorney fought like a wolf cornered. "This young woman," he sneered, pointing at me, "has built a narrative out of grief and suspicion. She's desperate to cling to her inheritance. And let's not forget, she is not who she claims to be. She's a product of secrets and lies herself. How reliable is a story from someone who doesn't even know her own identity?" The jury shifted uncomfortably. His words sliced at me, reopening wounds I thought I'd stitched closed. But I refused to let him win. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand with my head high. My voice trembled at first but grew steadier with every word. I told them about my mother's sacrifices, about the funeral revelation, about the DNA results, about the threats. I let them see my tears. I let them hear the cracks in my voice. I let them feel my rage. Because this wasn't just evidence. This was my life. Then came the cross-examination. My uncle's attorney circled me like a predator. "You claim he poisoned your mother. But isn't it true she had heart issues? Isn't it true she could have died naturally?" I swallowed hard. She was healthy. She had no prescription for digitalis. Someone put it in her system. Someone, he emphasized, leaning close. "But you don't know who." "Yes, I do." My eyes snapped toward my uncle. "I know it was him." Gasps rippled through the gallery. My uncle smirked, unshaken, like he thrived on the drama. The trial dragged on for weeks. Every day felt like walking a tightrope above fire. The prosecution built a strong case, but the defense chipped away at it, sowing seeds of doubt. And then, in the middle of it all, came the twist I never saw coming. A woman appeared in court. Middle-aged, with tired eyes and hands that trembled as she clutched her purse. She walked straight to the witness stand when called, and when she gave her name, my world tilted. It was the woman from the adoption file. She was my biological mother. The courtroom gasped. My breath caught in my throat. She looked at me, her eyes glistening. I was young, foolish, and scared. Samuel, your uncle wanted nothing to do with you. My family pressured me to give you up. But his sister, your adoptive mother, she begged me to let her raise you. She promised to keep you safe. And she did. Tears slid down my cheeks as she continued, her voice cracking. I never stopped loving you. I stayed away because I thought it was best. But when I heard what he did to his sister, I couldn't stay silent anymore. The defense scrambled to discredit her, but her testimony cut through the lies like a blade. She confirmed everything: his paternity, his cruelty, his desperate attempts to bury the truth. And the jury saw it. The trial ended in a storm. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours before returning with the verdict: guilty of homicide, guilty of fraud, guilty of attempted coercion. The judge's gavel thundered as he sentenced my uncle, my father, to life in prison without parole. I should have felt relief, justice, closure. But when the guards dragged him away, he twisted around one last time. His eyes locked on mine, and his lips curved into that same chilling smile I'd seen too many times before. This isn't over, he mouthed. A shiver ran down my spine. Even behind bars, he wanted me to live in fear. In the weeks that followed, life was strangely quiet. Too quiet. The news cycle moved on, people stopped whispering when I walked by, and the house became mine officially. But every creak of the floorboards, every shadow outside my window, made me wonder if he'd somehow reach me from prison. Then one evening I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Just my name scrawled in messy handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Blood always finds blood. Watch your back. My chest tightened. My uncle was locked away. But he had allies. People who still owed him favors. People who might come after me in his name. And that's when I realized, this story wasn't just about revenge. It was about survival. If he thought he could haunt me forever, he was wrong. Because I had inherited more from my mother than just her love. I had inherited her strength, her resilience, her fire. And I wasn't done fighting. The letter haunted me for weeks. Blood always finds blood. Watch your back. I kept it folded in my nightstand drawer, but its words echoed louder than the creaks in my old house. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. And it was enough to keep me looking over my shoulder everywhere I went. I started locking every door and window. I installed cameras around the house, even motion sensors on the back porch. But paranoia has a way of seeping into your bones. Every shadow looked like a figure, every sudden noise like footsteps. Yet, life still went on. One morning, as I was sorting through my mother's things, I came across an old leather-bound journal. It was tucked behind books on her shelf, dust clinging to its edges. When I opened it, her handwriting spilled across the pages. Her words were soft, tender, letters to me she never gave. In one entry written when I was 12, she wrote, "I know one day the truth may break her heart, but I pray she remembers that love is thicker than blood. I may not have given her life, but she gave me reason to live." Tears blurred the ink as I read. All the lies, all the secrets, they didn't erase the truth of her love. And maybe that's what my uncle hated most, that even though he was my father by blood, he had never been one by heart. That was the difference. That was the power. Still, the threat lingered. And then one night it materialized. I was coming home from the grocery store, bags in hand, when I noticed a car idling at the end of my street. Its headlights cut through the dark, unmoving. My stomach dropped. I quickened my pace, fumbling with my keys. As I reached the porch, I heard the car door slam. Heavy footsteps crunched gravel. "Hey," a male voice called out. I spun, heart hammering. A tall man in a hooded sweatshirt approached, his face shadowed. "Who are you?" I demanded, forcing my voice to sound stronger than I felt. He lifted his hands, palms out. "Relax. I'm just here with a message." My blood froze. "From who?" "From your father." His smirk glinted under the streetlight. "He says hello." Panic surged, but so did anger. I dropped the grocery bags, cans rolling across the porch, and pulled my phone from my pocket. "Take one more step and I'm calling the police." The man chuckled, slow and mocking. "Go ahead. Won't change the fact that you'll never be safe. He's got friends everywhere." I snapped a picture of his face before he turned and jogged back to the car. Tires screeched as it sped off into the night. My hands trembled as I called the police, breath shallow. When they arrived, I showed them the photo. This time they didn't brush me off. They traced the plate, connected the man to one of my uncle's old associates, and put him under questioning. And that's when everything shifted. The man cracked under pressure. He admitted my uncle had been using prison phone calls to orchestrate harassment, sending messages through old debts and favors. But here was the kicker: he also confessed something bigger. My uncle had been planning to appeal. He had bribed someone on the inside for favors, hoping to slip through legal cracks and secure a retrial. That was the last straw for me. I wasn't going to just sit back and defend myself anymore. I was going to finish what my mother had started: bury his lies for good. I worked with investigators, handed over every shred of evidence I had kept. The journals, the threats, the letters. But I didn't stop there. I went public. I sat down with a local news station, staring into the camera with my mother's photo clutched in my hands. I told the world everything. About the funeral revelation, the DNA shock, the poisoning, the trial, the threats, the harassment. By the end, tears streaked my face, but my voice was steady. He tried to silence me. He tried to erase me. But he doesn't get the final word. My mother does. And her word was love. The segment went viral. People flooded the comments with outrage, support, prayers. Overnight, my uncle's last scraps of public sympathy vanished. Even those who once pitied him saw him for what he was: a murderer, a coward, a man rotting in the cage he built for himself. His appeal was denied. The prison tightened restrictions, cutting off his contact with the outside. And just like that, his reach snapped. But the greatest revenge wasn't just his silence. It was my freedom. For the first time in years, I breathed without fear. I planted flowers in my mother's garden. I painted the front porch she always meant to fix. I sat in her favorite chair at sunset and read her journal entries aloud, as if she were still listening. And little by little, the house stopped feeling like a fortress under siege and started feeling like a home again. I'd like to say I forgave him, but forgiveness is too heavy a word for someone like that. What I did instead was refuse to let him define me. Because yes, he was my father by blood. But she was my mother by choice. And choice is stronger than blood. The moral: betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from family. But sometimes revenge isn't about destroying the other person. Sometimes it's about refusing to be destroyed yourself. I didn't just survive him. I outlived him. And that was the justice my mother would have wanted. I want you to tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in my place, and which city are you listening from? Don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel to keep supporting me.